It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello, and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And we have a guest. Please introduce yourself.
I am Heather Rose Jones. I am a recently retired biotech failure analyst and a fantasy and historical novelist.
Perfect.
Cool.
Oh, and a podcaster.
And a podcaster, yes. We'll give a musical shout out to your podcast right now. It's the Lesbian Historic Motif Podcast, and as of this recording, the most recent one's about a lesbian nun. So today we are here to discuss The Chatelaine
By Kate Hartfield.
And we will go through our ritual questions first. First being, are there lesbians in this book?
Hey, wait. Aren't we going to give a brief synopsis of the book first?
Oh my God. No, the guest is telling me the format of my own show.
Yes, so usually we ask the guest to give the brief spoiler-free synopsis.
Which is a good thing, because I've got one all written up and ready to go.
Sweet.
Perfect. Let's do that, and let's not retake that so that I can't hide my shame. Please go ahead.
So, imagine that you are an ordinary 14th century Flemish merchant, and one day you wake up in the middle of a Hieronymus Bosch painting, full of grotesque hybrid creatures, people with the heads of birds wearing pots for helmets, people with the bodies of fish, people whose limbs have been replaced by other things. Oh, and there's an enormous living hellmouth trundling around the countryside like an infernal cat bus that swallows and disgorges your undead kin and neighbors. And did I mention that your city has been besieged by the King of France for who knows how long? It doesn't matter, because everybody sends their armies through Flanders periodically. But the thing that has you really ticked off is that your worthless git of a husband came back from the dead to retrieve a treasure he never told you about, and by God, you will claim that treasure as your rightful inheritance, even if you have to bring a lawsuit against the Chatelaine of Hell itself.
Oh.
Very good.
Kate Hartfield says in her author notes that her artistic inspiration was actually the Peter Bruegel painting Dulem Griet, which is Mad Meg, which depicts a legendary woman warrior leading an army of women to pillage hell. But Bruegel was strongly influenced by Bosch in that work, so I am not wrong.
Well done.
Technically correct, the best kind of correct. I just took a look at this painting before we started recording, and it is full of wonderful details. My favorite being the poor skinny man's leg sticking out of the fish's mouth in the bottom right-hand corner.
Yes.
So yes, masterfully done. But now I will ask the ritual questions. The first of which is, are there lesbians in this book?
So I'm going to make the bold claim that the protagonist, Marguerite de Vos, fills our lesbian role. Not because she loves women. She's actually pretty much a universal misanthropist. But because she has absolutely no use for any of the men in the story. And she ends up assembling a largely female assault crew to take on hell. So I am going to claim her as one of ours.
I'm not even going to argue that. I think there's plenty of room in the text for this interpretation.
Yeah. I mean, the main thing we know about her is that she doesn't like men and that she likes women better than men, but
that's not saying much. And are there wizards in this story?
Oh, yeah.
The Chatelaine of Hell. Absolutely.
There's the Chatelaine of Hell.
Chatelaine of Hell being a textual wizard, and King Philippe being our metaphorical wizard here.
Well, and also, actually, another candidate for lesbian is, in fact, the Chatelaine of Hell, who threw her husband into an oubliette. So there's also another wizard. He just never comes out of the oubliette.
Yes, there is also the specter of Satan or whoever he is.
Yeah, misandry all over the place.
Yes, this is a... Well, I mean, I was going to say this is a book that doesn't like men very much, but we've read far more misandrist texts than this for this podcast.
This is not overtly misandrist.
We have Monoceros.
And Claude.
Yes.
And Claude.
And Claude, well, we'll get to Claude.
Yes.
But
Yes.
Claude is our good man.
Mm-hmm. And I must stress that we have Monoceros.
Yes.
Oh, I do love Monoceros. So why should you read this book? Let's do this.
No.
Heather,
You missed. Do they fight?
Oh, of course. Do they fight? Why is it's?
You give me a script.
Yes,
It's been
they
a long day.
absolutely
I'm following the script.
They fight it out. Yes, we appreciate. Thank you for keeping us on script.
So they don't just fight; they are at war, or rather, Marguerite is at war with the Chatelaine. The Chatelaine is kind of at war with all of Flanders,
And they have a lawsuit, which is my favorite kind of fighting.
Yeah. When I got halfway through this book and encountered the lawsuit, I was like, oh, Alexis is going to enjoy this.
Oh yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of deeply nerdy medieval legalistic stuff in here.
Yes.
Yes, which as a legal historian, though of a different continent, I very much appreciated.
But everybody is at war all the time because it's that time in history.
And it's Flanders, which is located in a place.
Flanders, yes.
Yes, one of the stomping grounds of history. This makes Belgium in this capacity the Korea of Central Europe. Or if you'd prefer something closer to home, the Poland of slightly to the left.
Which becomes an interesting continuing through line, as we will get to eventually.
Yes. Now, why should you read this book? And I'll ask Heather to go first, followed by Alexis, and then me.
All right.
So it is mind-bendingly weird. It totally immerses you in this alternative medieval Flanders that is simultaneously historically accurate and a surreal drug hallucination. And the more you know about the history of the region, the more of all those wonderful Easter eggs you will get and understand when those eggs are lobbed at you like a little stinking grenade.
And then hatch scrawny hellbeasts.
And then hatch little scrawny hillbeasts running around on their legs. Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, I think that sums it up pretty well. I will say that if you enjoyed a book that we reviewed a while ago, The Valkyrie, then you will also enjoy this. I read through this going, wow, this really reminds me of The Valkyrie. And then I got to the end and realized it was by the same author. So, which, really, so her style, she has a really strong stylistic voice, which I think is meticulously researched medieval weird. If you like that, this will be even weirder and I think more interesting than The Valkyrie.
We came down solidly meh on The Valkyrie, and I enjoyed this book more.
Yes.
I will say that.
Yes, I think this is a better book, partly, honestly, because she's willing to get a lot weirder with it.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. No. This is a fascinating sort of melange of ideas.
I had one other thing to add. Sorry, which is I really appreciate when the author has the courage of their convictions to make a really deeply unlikable female protagonist. That was well, and the author is clearly willing, understands that this person is really awful, in a way that I thought just added a lot to the narrative. Well,
okay, I have to say, as a woman of a certain age, that I had a lot of empathy for Marguerite. She is just she has no fucks left.
No, I had a lot of empathy for her and was totally rooting for her to go and win her lawsuit. She's just interpersonally kind of awful.
Yeah.
I don't have much to add to that beyond this is a book with a sense of humor.
Yes.
It is it's sometimes subtle and sometimes blatant, and sometimes it sneaks up and really surprises you with it. That is actually one of the main things that distinguishes it from The Valkyrie, is that this book is funny, which really helps. I enjoyed reading it quite a lot. Why shouldn't you read it? Same order.
So I think the why shouldn't you read it is the same as the why should you read it, which is to really get the most out of this book, you need to have a pretty deep, broad background in Flemish medieval history, art history, just the whole. You have to be able to get all the references, otherwise there's a lot of confusion in there. So, it is not a book for everyone. It is a book for the people it was written for. And if you are that person, then absolutely should read it. And if you aren't, then you may end up being one of those annoying people who give 1-star reviews saying, this author is just like, this is nonsense. I don't understand any of this. It's like they're talking over my head, and that makes me feel bad.
Mm.
Not that I'd ever have gotten a review like that.
Yeah, so, well, I will definitely say that this is not a book to read over Shabbat when you can't look up all the references. And you, Isaac, at least will be completely unsurprised to hear that I do have some minor quibbles with the depiction of the Jewish character. But, yeah, I mean, also, it's extremely weird, and we'll have some fun things with the content warnings. But it's also deeply unpleasant in places. And I don't actually think that is necessarily a bad thing, but I would not necessarily recommend this as a fun times read. Like, it's funny, but I would not read this. I feel like you have to be in a certain mood. Not only do you have to be a certain kind of person to appreciate it, but it helps if you're in a certain kind of mood.
So I would say two things. First of all, on a purely mechanical level, I think the second half drags a little bit. Just in terms of pure pacing. I was promised a trial, and it took us far too long to get to the trial.
No, I agree with that.
The other thing is that this is actually the second book in the row that we've covered that has some thoughts about whether you should get the surgery.
That's true.
This is in part a book about disability and a book about body modification, and it has a trans character in it, and there's discussion about whether the trans character is going to get his body modified or not. And I think that regardless of how one feels on the subject, and regardless of how the author might feel on the subject, this book takes place within an extremely medieval Catholic worldview. Both, in terms of the magic system and in terms of the beliefs of the people involved. And that underlies absolutely everything. And so you sort of end up with the conclusion that the same impulse that you might get to have the surgery is the same impulse that led to the Great War. So watch out for that if that's not a conclusion that you feel like you want to experience in a book.
And actually, it in a weird way, this book does somewhat fall afoul of the thing that cyberpunk does, which
precisely. Yes.
Yes. Like, and where the sort of body modification becomes a metaphor for becoming less human. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Isaac, with the idea of both the surgery and also disability.
That being said, I think there is plenty of room in the book for a reading where you can be like, no, it's badass, actually. So
there is, for example, Monoceros.
Yes. Or, in fact, the ultimate fate of our hero.
Oh, yeah, no. And I will say, for other reasons why you should read this book, I personally found the ending to just be deeply satisfying on multiple levels.
The ending was spectacular.
Like, a really solid ending. Like, this one really stuck the landing. And a book that can do that, can get away with a lot from me.
Yes. So, content warnings.
Oh, God.
Body horror.
So much body horror.
Body horror up the wazoo.
Indeed. Many, many things happen to bodies, some of which are new on me, although obviously not new to Bruegel the Elder, or Hieronymus Bosch.
Yeah, in general, there's a lot of death and gore.
Indeed.
Yeah. I mean, it's war.
Yes.
Yep.
It's
medieval
war and,
times.
Yeah, and lots of people die in horrible ways.
Yeah, there is a violent death of a central character. I'm trying to do that without spoiling anything.
Mm.
Yes, yes. So the violence does not leave named characters untouched, and one named character does die violently, and also there's also plague, and there's whatever's going on with the revenants. Like I'm not sure. There's something going on there that I feel like needs some kind of content warning, but I'm not sure what it is.
Well, it's basically a zombie apocalypse thing.
There's a zombie apocalypse. Yeah, no, but there's also it's not quite mind control, but there's a thing where people are getting their that are getting some sort of like hypnosis mind control thing happening to them to turn them into zombies as well.
Yeah, and the other content warning to note is Claude. We have a trans man as a central character who gets misgendered a lot simply because medieval people did not have a concept of transness. Well, they did have a concept of transness. That would be a whole other episode. But let's just say that a lot of characters do not recognize his identity.
True, there's a lot of misgendering, though there's a surprising amount of non-misgendering, too.
Yeah, most people come around on him quite quickly, which is kind of interesting. And perhaps we can discuss that more later. But not the priest. So animals die in this book, children die in this book, and people are tormented for very long periods of time.
Children also kill in this book.
Yes. Child soldiers, Flemish child soldiers. So before we think of more things, which we always do, let us move on to the spoiler zone and get started. Spoiler zone. Okay, so I understand, Heather, that you have detailed notes. So would you like to lead this discussion?
Okay, I'm going to start off with the most petty little detail of mine. Nyx. The Nyx.
The Nyx. I wanted to see more of the Nyx.
Yes, that's exactly my point. It's like,
absolutely,
we have the Nyx, who gets to be a deus ex machina a couple of times, but it's like there is this magical water snake creature that saves Marguerite's ass a couple times and then just disappears. And I wanted the Nyx to come back at some point. I wanted the Nyx to have her own story.
Yep, absolutely. I think the Nyx is also just like a great character. And I mean, it makes sense that the Nyx isn't going to show up. Like the Nyx kind of tells you that it's not going to show up by being like, nope, I have my boundary. I can't go any further. And then the characters aren't ever going back. But I would have liked some even just brief callback.
No, I agree entirely. Weirdly enough, the Nyx is sort of like a Tolkien wizard in terms of the role that it plays in the narrative, which is, very very helpful, but mostly maddeningly unhelpful, and then disappears and leaves our protagonists on their own. But it's also very interesting that like the Nyx is the only like element of folk mythology that we see in the book. I mean, it's of course always difficult to draw the line between like Catholic theology and folk belief, since the one subsumes the other eagerly. But we begin with the Nyx, and we begin with a child meeting the Nyx, and it's sort of the same child who is in love with like the Renard and Isengrin stories, and it sort of leads you to the idea of what kind of story it will be. But then no, you have to grow up, you have to become a child soldier, and then you have to be subsumed into the Catholic notion of the world and hell and the beast and all of this other stuff.
I loved Child Marguerite.
Oh yeah, yes. She's great.
She is a little snot, and yet she's so fierce and independent, and we can see the seeds of adult Marguerite in her. But adult Marguerite kind of loses a lot of that daring charm. She gets some of it back eventually, but comparing the two is like I wanted Child Marguerite to get a better adulthood.
Yeah, well, I think her husband, I feel like I actually thought it worked because you see Child Marguerite and then you see adult Marguerite, and she's you can even quite early you can just tell how bitter and angry, and how that spark of fierceness is just and cleverness and creativity is mostly gone, or at least suppressed.
Or it's been burned down to a little core where what's left is that massive sense of wanting justice in the world.
Right. And then you meet her husband and you watch them interact and you're like, oh, okay. Like, that's where this is very much a like the patriarchy kills your soul kind of moment.
And I'm trying to remember. We don't see her husband alive before he becomes.
No, we don't.
Right?
We don't. But we
Right.
get a sense of what he was like. First of all, from seeing him dead, the fact that
from her memories of him.
Yeah.
Right, and Magritte's daughter, who apparently did love her father, still doesn't really seem to have any good memories of him.
Okay, can I talk about Beatrix,
Yes.
the daughter?
Yes.
So, I want to slap her silly.
But she's so good and so pure.
She's so good and so pure and so doormat.
With apologies to our guest and anyone who isn't familiar with Umineko no Nakugoro ni. Oh, Beatrice!
Well,
Okay,
Yes.
she
Yes,
gets
but-
the magic distaff, and that redeems her a little bit. But I want to shake her.
well, the thing is that when you see her interact with her mother, you see exactly how she ended up being such a doormat. Like, she has never been given a chance, clearly, to have any independence whatsoever.
Well, yeah, and if you think about it as in, like all the children that Marguerite lost, and this is the one who survived, and you can see how that might lead to, is like, I am going to shape this person into somebody who survives if I have to, like, strangle all the personality out of her.
Right, and none of the bad things that happen to me are allowed to happen to her, which is, like, Magritte keeps going, oh, if I'd known you loved the man, I never would have let you marry him. And it's clear that that's not about you should be miserable. It's about you should never be, like, she doesn't want to ever let her daughter be vulnerable. And her attempts to prevent her daughter from ever being put in a vulnerable position have created this lovely doormat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that she's there as for a couple of reasons. One of which is that, and to circle back to kid Marit and adult Marit, where we feel the weight of the brutality that has turned Marit into this, as a sort of way of being like, okay, this is textually a book about a virago, a shrew, because that's what the painting is about, and we need you to understand immediately how one gets that way. And how one can be boiled down to what is in fact a very childish insistence on fairness in the universe, which is sort of the one part of her child self that hasn't been snuffed out. Mm-hmm. But also we have like, okay, so let's put a cartoonishly virtuous woman in the same set of circumstances and see what happens to her. Turns out that she ends up doing exactly the same thing.
And
because of the,
let's put a reason, and then like let's also put a fairly practical, reasonably kind woman also to accompany them.
yes, the good mother.
You definitely have your maiden mother crone thing going on here.
Oh, we very much do. That completely skated past me.
I think that's a little bit simplistic because we've got not counting the Chatelaine, we've got the four travelers together, as it were. You got Jacqueline, who's the good mother, the rich merchant who has been employing Marguerite as a wet nurse. But you've also got, I'm blanking on her name, the other woman, the one that we meet at the mill.
Gertrude, right?
Yes, Gertrude. I love Gertrude.
Right.
Gertrude shows up a little bit later, though.
Possibly my favorite character in the book, Gertrude.
Yeah, but she doesn't slot easily into like a maiden mother crone.
She doesn't. I'm just saying that those three characters are. I'm not trying to say that all the women in the book are.
Okay.
Just that you have this interesting trio that travel, the three women who travel out of the city together form this interesting trio. But no, Gertrude, one of the things that makes Gertrude great is that she breaks the pattern.
Yeah, she's like she's damaged. She's really damaged.
Yeah.
But she's also practical. And she's a fun addition.
Mm-hmm. Now the image of her gleefully, like a badass, not looking back at the explosion as hell explodes with her sack of loot, running away barefoot is my favorite image that the distaff shows. The very interesting thing about her is that sort of like how quickly her sense of helplessness comes and goes. it sort of feels like a learned helplessness almost. I mean, part of it is just this, obviously the reaction to this immediate horrible trauma, but her sense of independence is so conditional on whether she is alone or not. But that when she feels safe, she's suddenly capable of all kinds of things, including like running this massive, mill hammer at the forge, which...
Well, she's comfortable in her own space, but she's also, desperately afraid of being alone because she has been abandoned. Well, not abandoned, but, all of her family's been killed. And so, she would not leave the mill, except that now she is desperately afraid of being alone. And that's why she goes with them. So she's very much somebody driven by negative emotions.
And she's somebody who... She strikes me as somebody who is in the process of figuring out how to make her various traumas sort of, work for her. Like that, when she's freaking out when she's got the kid, when she's alone with the kids. And so she locks them in the privy because she's like, well, that was safe for me. So, and, it doesn't, I don't think she really entirely processes, okay, this is going to be really miserable for the kids and, kind of traumatize them. But...
Yeah, child misery is a thing, though.
Yeah, with all these. But it's just, some of this is that she seems to be able to go, okay, I'm going to let my fears motivate me in certain ways. And so that's some of like how she, convinces herself to leave versus when she doesn't want to convince herself to leave.
Back to Beatrice. But yes, no, Beatrix, despite being very damp, is also has all of these sort of saintly attributes, which with her name I thought was interesting. That she is she seems to sort of be untouchable by evil, but this book has a lot of very complicated ideas of what evil means.
Well, it's interesting that she interacts with her zombie dead husband and doesn't get infected.
Right.
And
that's really interesting.
What you were saying about, her being beatific, as it were, that she does have a sort of a holy aura around her that protects her.
Yes, and it's not sexual purity because
No.
She's the only person here who seems to have ever had a happy sex life. It's absolutely not doesn't exist on that level, but you're right. She does have this sort of, she will not actually give in and invite him in, which is how the zombie plague is spread. Even on a technicality, as we see with poor Marky.
Well, it's and not just invite him in, because there's the two things, right? Is that either you invite the dead in and that brings the plague on your household, or you go out to join them. And I mean, technically, Beatrix probably should have caught the hell plague. Like that occurs to Marguerite at the beginning. That the same technicality that got her, her daughter's also part of that household. She wasn't in the house, but also...
There was the one point at which Beatrix calls her husband.
Right.
She was thinking about him in her sleep, and he shows up. So, yeah, by all rights, she should have gotten infected.
But she doesn't get infected with either kind, even though she's absolutely at risk for the grieving, the kind where they go out and join them and become zombies themselves. And every time she's called on, and part of this is also, it's sort of ambiguous how much of this is sort of this like, holy aura of goodness that surrounds her, and how much of this is just her refusal to ever commit.
Yes. Or how much of it is the fact that she happens to be wielding a magic staff.
Right.
There is that, yes.
She was given because the Knicks wanted to prove a point to her mother, who was being, mean.
Right, because she was... Right, I mean, it's also just, she does the fairy tale thing of being polite to the, magical creature that is, water monster that is saving you.
Yeah, I liked that touch. The whole, like the old fairy tale of the jewels and toads.
Right.
She gets the magic gift because she treated the Knicks like a a human being. No,
with the appropriate degree of respect for the
Yes.
creature's age and vintage. Yeah, that's Diamonds and Toads by Charles Perrault. Arn Thompson grouping 480 for those of you who are keeping score at home. It's the one where the polite sister spits up treasure and the rude sister spits up vipers and toads. Neither one a real desirable outcome, IMO.
I want more Nicks.
Yeah.
Oh.
So actually, one thing I thought was really interesting about the opening story is that you almost have this moment. You have this moment where the Nyx offers to take Magritte away and just be like, "You don't have to go to the city. You can just leave the city. I'll take you away. I like you. I'm not." And she doesn't have to become a child soldier. And and at first she rejects it, right? Because she sees her dad and brother. And she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's scary. But then when she sees her mom and sister attacking the French army, that's when she's like, well, I can't leave the women in my family. And she becomes what, the Nyx thinks of as a boring person. But you almost get this sense, having this opening story, you almost get the sense that there's a completely other story that could have been told if she'd, gone off with the Nyx, where she could have had these folkloric adventures instead. And she chooses to stay, and and this gets her a daughter and a family life for a while, but also means that she's trapped in this completely different, much less pleasant story.
But one of Marguerite's key features here also is this unwavering commitment to her family, where
to the women of her family.
The women of her family. But, so many things that she does to her own detriment that are intended to benefit her family because that is the appropriate, just thing for her to do.
I think it almost amounts to a tragic flaw,
Yeah, I think so too.
Because it does sort of end in her undoing. She step by step, she goes to her own death, and her own particular kind of death, which is like wrapped up in this archetype of the woman who will just not shut up.
Oh yes.
Yes. we should actually talk about Ultima Ratio Feminam, or whatever it is.
Yes.
The final argument of Queens in this case, turning her into a literal hell beast on wheels is the phrase that it uses. She becomes a giant cannon and explodes hell through her mouth.
Well, and she does it again through force of will. She takes in the powder and refuses to explode until they totally jam her full of powder enough that she can explode everyone around her and the hell beast. Well, I guess the hell beast actually isn't killed, but yeah, it's like that stubbornness, that act of will, and just roaring out her ultimate rage.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just her out of her affection with her family that she does it. It's also out of loyalty to Bruges itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's texturally patriotic, and it's that the people are. What changes her mind as a child is that the French are there in her city, and the Queen of Hell is there in her country. Is the thing that ultimately does it, and it's like she would have presumably led a happier life out in the out with the Nyx in a different kind of fairy tale, but instead she lives in a war story.
Yep.
And we would all maybe have wanted more Nyx, but she doesn't get it.
And I think that this is a good place to talk about sort of the eternal fate of Flanders, because that idea of I am going to fight for my scrap of land here, and so setting the scene, at one point Beatrix with her magic distaff says that she wants to see the future, and so after that she keeps getting these flashes of the future of Flanders, but they're from like the First World War, and she sees airplanes and bombs and people in trenches, and that just sort of reinforces that people have been marching through Flanders for a long time
and will continue to do so.
What did they mean by this?
And yet there is still that patriotism, that this is ours, this is worth defending. And I thought that was a really interesting layer to add into it.
I don't know whether it works.
Well, so it didn't, it worked for me in the terms of this being a good character motivation. It didn't work for me in terms of winning me over, partly because of the existence of Claude.
Yes, let's go into that a little bit further.
Yeah, let's talk about Claude.
So, okay, there's a lot to talk about Claude's transness, which I do want to do, but I wasn't 100% thrilled with how Claude's Jewishness was handled, which is fine.
I didn't feel like Claude's Jewishness was handled at all, except for giving it lip service.
Right, exactly. That is also my problem with it, including when Claude, announced it, just sort of tosses off, oh yeah, no, my entire family was killed in the Shepherd's Crusade, as were all the other Jews of our town. But nobody reacts to that, even though this is actually one of the periods, I looked it up, where the Jews aren't allowed in France. So Claude is just illegally hanging out there. And it's not like anybody's going to necessarily care about one random mercenary, but there should have been more, Claude should have felt more out of place to everybody around him, I think.
Well, it's an interesting thing because I did get the feeling around Claude that it's like, well, if we are going to sell this book about Flemish history, what kind of character could we do that would make this attractive to a contemporary publisher? I know. And we will make Claude a load-bearing character in terms of the traits that we give him, albeit not in terms of skin color. That is, I actually really appreciated the way that the book did sort of actual period accurate variations in ethnicity in this place, but he does run the risk of being sort of a diversity hire as a character.
Well, and there's also just part of it is also just if making the one Jewish character a mercenary means that he's rootless.
Yes. You don't have to deal with any of his Jewishness.
Right, but also he's a rootless cosmopolitan. With
none of the patriotic fervor for Bruges, well, exactly.
Just with no loyalty really at all, except for, to the other soldiers. And that makes sense for a mercenary, but it's sort of unfortunate for, the one Jew in the book.
So here's another thing that kind of felt weird to me, which is, our band of heroes is really a band of heroines. This is a very female-centric group going through the world together. And for me, that sort of frames Claude as being female adjacent to some extent.
Yeah, no, it absolutely feels like one of those events that goes, oh yes, women and extremely, and then insert extremely tortured thing here because they don't want to say AFAB, but that's actually what they mean.
Men of female experience.
Right, exactly.
And what doesn't get the impression that Claude's, attitude on life is very much informed by having been previously assigned female, other than that, there's a lot of resistance of being forced to be female. But, I think about all of the trans-adjacent characters in medieval literature, where the typical thing that happens is, and this is going to break what I was saying earlier a little bit, but the typical thing that happens is that you have a assigned female person presenting as male, falls in love with another assigned female person presenting as female, and then you get a magical sex change at the end. And what you get instead here is Claude is a trans man who is gay. So all of his romantic or semi-romantic relationships that we hear about are with men, which kind of breaks the whole, band of females thing that I was saying, because this doesn't end up being essentially a crypto-lesbian character. Instead, it's a crypto-gay character.
Yes, he's othered to the third or fourth degree here. And part of this is a practical matter. It's, we don't have to deal with sort of the practical period elements of women traveling alone with a man who they're not related to, because Claude doesn't count as a man in the eyes of the law.
Also, it's much easier for him to hide that he's Jewish.
Yeah, that's a solid point. This may be the podcast's first circumcision joke, although it is also a commentary on how Jews were more othered in this period than this narrative suggests. It does feel like it conveniently skirts a lot of issues that would otherwise naturally come up, and also, as you say, doesn't reflect the folklore of the period in a way that so many of the other elements of the book do. But let's, since we're talking about the transness, let's talk about the way the book thinks about disability. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of discussion about what kind of body modifications are okay and which kinds of body modifications are not, under the moral universe that this book operates in. Magritte being nearsighted and it's like, well, I wouldn't give my soul to have a pair of glasses, but I certainly would like a pair of glasses. And the one-legged farmer who is like, I don't want to be a centaur, actually, because I'm fine the way that I am. I'm not broken. I am whole as a one-legged person, which is, that's great. It's like, okay, disabled people aren't broken, they're whole. We will speak this truth to the Queen of Hell. On the other hand, why not? I want to be a centaur.
Right. I think you're right that this book is taking, it sort of has this sort of consistent moral stance about body modification. And it's because obviously your trans experience is just as valid if you don't want the surgery, and disabled people should absolutely not have to be, cured or get magically fixed or, have prosthetics or whatever. But also, actually having the medication that works on you is good. And, having glasses is great.
Yeah, the moralizing of, getting a body modification is losing your soul. It has some interesting implications there. Although I note that Marguerite was not willing to lose her soul for good vision, but she was willing to lose it for revenge.
Well, that is absolutely consistent with her characterization.
Yes.
Entirely relatable. My mind returns to the Fursuiters of Ypres, which is possibly an album title in my future. But the people of Ypres who walk around in fursuits and in steampunk outfits to mimic the chimeras, the chimeras, the creatures of hell. Mm-hmm. That felt like a bit of like contemporary social commentary almost.
Yeah, although I think it worked for me.
I mean, I enjoyed it immensely.
But yeah, I saw that too. That it's like, oh, this is a fandom.
Yes, exactly. We condemn the moral weakness of the fandom of Ypres, who should be resistant like the hardy people of Ghent, and down with the French-speaking Walloons and freedom for Flanders, etc. But yes, no, it is interesting because like we read a lot of stories that are very immersed in what the authors reconstructed as sort of the moral philosophy of the age, and this comes from like all over the place. This is extremely present in books from ancient China, like from the perspective of ancient China that we've read, but and certainly from
early modern China, really
early modern China, this period of history, but across the board, like there's so much moral implication built into physical deformity and or mutilation at the time, like no matter where you are in the world. And I think that if you want to write an authentic text from that perspective, you do have to, make that part of the worldview of all of your characters to a greater or lesser extent. And it's just interesting to see how different authors deal with it.
Yeah, I have a great deal of respect for authors who will write the problematic views of their setting, and not, soften the edges for, it's like, oh, but we need to make this character likable for modern people with modern sensibilities.
Right. This is part of what I mean by Magritte is, just is in many ways can be unlikable.
Slashfic Corner.
So I have a fanfic pairing that I want to propose.
Okay.
Oh, please.
I think that Marguerite and the Chatelaine should have ended up together. I think that in another storyline, they could have ended up being allies. They are very closely aligned in their attitudes and experiences, and the only real problem was that they were totally misaligned in their personal goals. But I think the two of them should get together.
I think the two of them
Maybe
should
in the
absolutely
afterlife.
have, their AO3, some fix on their AO3 pairing.
And that's the best kind of fanfic, because it is a fanfic that strikes at the heart of the book's argument. Because Magritte herself thinks repeatedly the Chatelaine is also a divorced woman slash widow.
They could absolutely have their late in life bitter divorcee lesbian awakening.
Sitting at the tavern over an ale.
Yeah, yes. But part of the whole argument of the book is that no, actually, solidarity between women will lose out to patriotism in this instance, and the ambitions of rulers will win out over the solidarity between women. And so I think that a fic that argues in the other direction would be welcome as a bit of counter programming.
Yes.
I just think that the Chatelaine, and I don't feel like the Chatelaine is set up by the author to be an absolute villain. We are meant to empathize with her. We are meant to secretly hope.
This is why she gets viewpoint chapters.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
In this book, we only ever get viewpoint chapters from characters we're supposed to empathize with.
No, the Chatelaine is a great character, and, we should all come out so functional from having been trapped in hell long enough to have forgotten our name and history. And you can it's absolutely certain that you can tell why she is like this and why her concerns about her personal safety and independence would trump any sympathy that she would have for this other woman. But we can imagine a better world where it doesn't.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna toss out one little just visual snippet that I loved, which is at the very end when the after the explosion and the eggs have started so the Hellmouth has laid its eggs and they've started cracking and they are running around on little spindly chicken legs, just like in the Bruegel painting.
Yes.
And the other thing that I suddenly weirdly flashed on was, original Star Trek, the Horta, the rock creature that lays its eggs in the silicon nodules, and it's fighting for the lives of its babies. I just suddenly I had this parallel. I don't know.
I wish I could join you in this. I'm just not a TOS person.
Yeah.
It's before my time.
Well, you have to remember that I am an old, and I saw the original Star Trek when it first came out, so I kind of imprinted on that. All the later series are not the true thing. So
reasonable. We will not.
I will not argue that point.
So I will note, in terms of also possible lesbian pairings, is that Beatrix and Gertrude do run off together.
I think that's almost meant to be textual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and at the end, Beatrix and Gertrude go off to walk the Pilgrim Trail together, and Claude and Monoceros go off together as well.
Yes.
And they kiss.
Yes,
canonically. So
all of the endings are very gay, I would say.
Yes, absolutely.
Just noting that, we it's funny that we spend all this time talking about, all the lesbian potential. Marguerite's story is definitely one of, lesbian potential wasted. But and her daughter, for once, actually, she is getting her daughter the sort of life that she wanted. Except that they're leaving. Mm-hmm. They're, Magritte has stayed.
But they're leaving with the treasure. They've got the treasure.
That's the thing, but, like, they've got the treasure, but, like, Magritte's, part of her fatal flaw is that she stays. And...
Yes, it may be important to note that they're getting the heck out of Belgium.
Right.
That is part of their happy ending.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
It's just, this is a way in which she is different from her mother, but, it's giving her access, finally, after she has had so much of her sort of personality forcibly suppressed by her mother. She's finally able to do, some of the things that her mother never would have been able to do. Because she has money and freedom.
Money, freedom, a hot redhead blacksmith partner, and, the Spain at her feet.
Yes.
Yep.
I do want to talk about Monteceros before we
should absolutely
wrap up,
talk about Monteceros.
because I think it's fascinating, because this book is, as you pointed out, this book, has that, hardcore old school feminist feel about it in much the same way that the Valkyrie did. But by God, is Monteceros like the the absolute pinnacle of the ideals of masculinity?
Yes!
Just like, he's huge, he's shirtless, he's buff, he's a unicorn,
he's loyal,
he's gentle, he's strong, and he's gay. Also honorable. So honorable. Monteceros would not hesitate to form the Arch of Honors, I tell you what.
And he's one of the few characters who gets a character arc. He changes, or at least our understanding of him changes. He evolves across the story, and that was really interesting. You don't get this... The bit at the end when he and Claude go off together, that does not come out of the blue. You have seen him courting Claude all along.
Yes. And this is like the one place, it's the one place where you actually see him bending his loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he's grappling with himself. And it's actually one of my favorite scenes in the book, because, as you say, the characters in this book are not given to introspection, which I think is probably relatively accurate under the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But in his position, Monteceros does have time to consider the duality of his being, and to really get philosophical about what parts of him are the unicorn and what parts of him are the Italian rogue. So good. And yes, no, he's sensitive and introspective on top of everything else, and it's just interesting to see such a paragon of masculinity get plopped in the middle of this narrative, and he survived, which I was absolutely not expecting. In fact, the ending with him and Claude completely came out of the blue for me because of how dire and dark everything else is. And I was like, wow, okay, love wins. And this is a very interesting kind of love to win at the end of the day here.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's and actually this is another interesting thing, is that because the Chatelaine has this paragon of masculinity, and there's absolutely nothing sexual between them.
No, what she values in him is that he's safe and that she can control him.
Yes.
Or so she thinks.
Yes. Just, this is another point in favor of the Chatelaine also being a lesbian.
And I mean, this is her fatal flaw, is that she had a unicorn and she fed the unicorn into the hell furnace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because she is so traumatized and is acting in much the same way that Gertrude was, out of fear the entire time. She doesn't see the beauty of what's in front of her.
Well, she sees it. She just decides that she would rather live without that.
She uses it.
Yeah, rather live without that in the name of becoming Duchess of Flanders.
Well, and the other part of her fatal flaw with respect to Monteceros is that, she totally trusts that he is her creature. She made him. He is totally obedient to her. He will do whatever she wants. And it never occurs to her that he might have a will of his own and come up with goals that he wants that are separate from hers.
This is another thing that she and Margit could bond over, is being mothers who are disappointed in their children.
Well, and I mean, also, I mean, this is the same thing that's how Magritte ends up getting to blow her up. Because on some level, she just cannot accept that her own creations would betray her.
This is true.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So there's this very vivid image in my mind that I think I have seen one of these cannons that has like eyes and a mouth on it cast into a decorative cannon. I'm
Yes.
pretty sure I've seen one in a museum somewhere. And when Magritte agrees to be put into the furnace to be turned into a chimera, she becomes a human cannon, that she basically just a body with a bore down the gullet. And she is this thing. And that, as the author notes, there was a specific bombard from 15th century Flanders that was named de la Gritte, after the character in, similar to the character in the Bruegel painting, that represents this mad woman character, blasting out her rage and hatred of the world, as it were. And there was the motto that the Chatelaine scratches onto her at that point, and I think you mentioned it earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have. There's a centuries long history of military men naming guns after women, including in the First World War, and in the Second. So.
Yeah, so I found that the motto scratched onto her is Ultima Ratio Mulierum, the final argument of women. And it's Marguerite's final argument, is like, destroy it all!
That's one of the other points that the book is making, is one that we have seen repeated many a time, which is that, that utopia where women run things because they're not warlike. Sorry.
Yeah. I did think one of the things I really liked about the ending also was just that you spend the entire time, basically the entire book, with Magritte knowing that she's going to die. And being pretty okay with it, actually. Like, she doesn't like her life enough she's not suicidal, but she doesn't like her life enough to be really invested in whether or not she survives. Her goal is for her daughter to get the 2/3 of her inheritance and have a good life. And so, usually the two ways that a story like this can go is that either she doesn't die, which is a happy ending, but deprives you of a lot of the weight, narrative weight, or she dies and it's just kind of depressing, but you knew it was going to happen. And in this case, she picks a completely different way to die that takes, everyone she wants to take out with her. It's just very satisfying.
Her death is her victory.
Yeah, it is nice to see a book with where the hero is a suicide bomber. I mean, I don't know if nice is actually the word I want.
But it works. It narratively works really well in this case.
Yeah, I have to say, as a pacifist, I'm not going to, support this as a path forward in life. But narratively speaking, it is the perfect ending.
It is very much in keeping with her fatal flaw being patriotism.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Do we have any other little notes that we want to mention before we wrap up?
We've covered everything I had notes on.
I will note that I really liked how the distaff, and just that Beatrix is very good at spinning, and this is actually a really useful skill to have. And I think actually in some ways having the distaff be magical is a way of, in this still wartime, adventure novel, still sort of trying to give some narrative weight and importance to women's crafts.
Well, yes, because the distaff is the ultimate female symbol.
Right, exactly.
The way you show the emasculation of a man in art is by making him spin.
Also, the the hero of the game Loom, which nobody will remember, wielded a distaff as his wizard staff, and it reminded me of that. And that's not a useful comment, but I'm going to make it. In the game Loom, you could play music on your distaff for some reason. That was the spell that turns you into a swan. Irreversibly. Speaking of being old, that the fact that I played that game near when it first came out marks me as a very distinctly being in my 40s. But the only other thing that I wanted to mention was that is back to Monteceros, my favorite topic, which is that when he describes that he is described as having gone to look for salvation in purity of service. And like self-abnegation, which, like, I think that there's a theological point being made there where it's like, that is the correct approach. He went to the wrong place. He went to like exactly the wrong place, like the opposite of the right place, to do that. But the fact that he wanted to walk that path is the clue that he is in the end a virtuous person.
And in the end, when Claude asks him, why did you help me? Monteceros says, because I could tell that you're a good man. So he found his own redemption in Claude.
The weighty medieval moral truths.
Yes.
All right. But I think that will be. I think we'll bring the episode to an end there. Thank you so much, Heather, for joining us. This was a blast.
Yes, thank you.
This was so fun. I really enjoy your show, and it's been a joy to be on it.
We're very happy to have you, and thank you for making me read this extremely weird, interesting book.
Indeed. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I saw a werewolf with a cone of pomfret in his hand, walking down by the Leperly Canal. He was looking for some mayonnaise to squirt on his chips. Gonna get some stroopwafels later. Ah-ooh, for suitors of Ypres. Ah-ooh, steampunks of Ypres. And so on.